So golden ale, it's not the trendiest of styles. It's not packed full of hops or big on the ABV or, you know, really punching you in the face with flavors or anything. But it's one of my favorite styles to brew because the focus is really on drinkability and refreshment. So for me, you know, a nice balanced drinkable golden ale is something that I'd love to have on tap all the time, because it's a great drink to have in the summer, and yeah, a nice sessionable beer. So yeah, this video is about my latest iteration of a golden ale. It's a recipe kind of formula that I've kind of tweaked and played around with for quite a while. So the hops are different on this one, but certainly the things like the grain bill and that, I've kind of settled on a fairly consistent method and recipe for golden ale that I'll go through in this video. So let's get brewing. So let's get straight into the recipe for this one. You have quite a bit of flexibility with golden ales. On the hoppier end, they can be quite close to an APA. Nowadays, a lot of people do use American hops in them, and that's something I'll be doing in this recipe. At the, I guess, slightly tamer end of the scale, they can be more just like a kind of golden bitter, using more traditional English hops and so on. So there's a fair bit of scope in terms of how hoppy you want to make it, whether you want it to be quite fruity or have more traditional kind of English or even noble hop character to it in some cases. So certainly hopping wise, there's a fair bit of flexibility. On the malt bill, obviously, you know, you have to keep it fairly light in colour, but you can still play around with the grain bill a bit in terms of adding layers of different malt flavours to it. You might want the malt to be more of a presence in the beer, or you might want it, again, more balanced towards the hops or somewhere in between. So that's where the kind of interest in the recipe comes for me, really. And I've, as I said, kind of settled on a grain bill that I like to use for golden ales, which I think works quite well. And that is basically using a kind of blend of a traditional English pale malt, things like Maris Otter are good for this. In this case, I'm using Warminster pale malt, which isn't a specific type like Maris Otter, I don't think, but it's a really nice pale ale malt, and some English Pilsner or lager malt as well. So I've got about 1.5 kilos of each of those, and then about 10% of Munich, which in this case works out at 400 grams, and then a little bit of crystal malt just to add a touch more color to it and a little bit of sweetness and body, and that will also help with things like your head retention and so on. So I've used two crystal malts which are at the light end of the scale. So Caragold, which is the lighter one, which is not too far off Carapils in terms of the color, so it's very light but just a little bit more color to it than Carapils, similar to Carahel as well, so it's kind of in between those two. I think it's only 10 or 12 EBC, something like that maybe. And then we've got Cara malt, which is just slightly darker but still very much at the lighter end of the scale for crystal malt. So they're not going to add a huge amount of colour, but maybe just a little bit of residual sweetness and yeah, kind of body and head retention, hopefully. So I've not too much of those. We're only looking at about between 6 and 7% total. 160 grams of the Cara Gold and 80 grams of Cara Crisp in the recipe. I will put a link to the Brewfather recipe for this in the description, so just click down there if you want to see the full recipe rather than having to go back through the video to see what's on screen. So that's the malt bill. That gives us, or it should give us, an OG of around 1042. So we're aiming for about 4.5% with this. Again, golden ales, I want it to be in that kind of session strength category, so usually, you know, not any higher than about 5%, so somewhere between 4 and 5% is the target for me in terms of finished ABV. And with your depending what yeast you're using and how high you mash and so on, your original gravity is probably going to want to be somewhere between kind of 1040 to 1046 ish. Again, there's a few other variables to consider there, but that would be where I would normally be starting from. This one I'm looking at 1042, probably going down to about 1008 on the FG to give me about 4.5% final gravity. So I mentioned the hops that I wanted to use, a mixture of American hops in this. I'm also going to put in some EKG as well. Whether or not that will give me much flavour, I don't know. So it may be overwhelmed a bit by the American hops, but I like the idea of just blending a little bit of the traditional kind of English character with some of the American hop flavours. So I'm using some EKG in it. And some Centennial and Amarillo. So Centennial and Amarillo is a nice hop combination, and yeah, we're just putting a little bit of EKG into the boil as well to add a little bit more of a layer, hopefully, to that. We'll see if it works. So I've got Centennial and EKG in at 60 minutes to give me my the bulk of my bittering there. I am going for a fairly high bitterness on this. I do like the golden ales to have a decent kick of bitterness to them. I think, again, looking at the drinkability and so on, a fairly assertive bitterness on a golden ale works quite well with that. So I'm around about 40 IBUs on this beer. If you want the bitterness a little bit softer, you may want to drop that down to 30, 35 or something like that. But I think for a kind of 4.5% beer, I would probably, say at least 30 IBUs would probably be a good target for a golden ale. So we've got 12 grams of Centennial and 10 grams of EKG going in at 60 minutes. I'm then adding 30 grams or about an ounce if you speak in those units for EKG at 5 minutes, so a little bit more EKG in the boil, and then after that it's just a 20-minute hop stand of Amarillo and Centennial, 25 grams of each of those for 20 minutes at 80 degrees C. I didn't do a dry hop on this. You can dry hop golden ales, and I think that in some cases that's a good idea and will work quite well, but you can end up getting more towards an APA if you go too big on kind of the dry hop and the hop stand. And with 50 grams of American hops in at Whirlpool, I figured that I could probably get away without doing a dry hop on this one, and I just wanted to keep it fairly simple on this beer. But I've certainly used dry hops on beers like this before. I'd say probably about between 30 and 50 grams would be okay. Maybe don't go too much beyond that, because as I said, you're probably going to be starting to get in towards more of a sort of APA kind of hop balance there, where it's going to be super hoppy and more about the hop aroma and flavors than you would get on a typical golden ale. Although, as I said, there's quite a bit of overlap, I think, between golden ales and APAs anyway, certainly if you're using American hops in them, as a lot of people are nowadays. So that's the hopping. I was mashing fairly low on this one, so it's a 65-degree mash, which helps us to get a nice dry beer at the end. Again, I think for the drinkability, you want a golden ale to be fairly dry on the finish. So that gets us down to the 1008 final gravity with a 65-degree mash. For the yeast, I am using Laumon Bry 97. Now, that is an American West Coast ale yeast, but I don't think there's any issue really with using those sorts of clean, neutral yeasts for golden ales. Obviously, you can use an English ale yeast if you want to bring in a little bit of character from that, but I think the American yeasts or ale yeasts are also very good because they're going to give you a nice dry finish, fairly neutral in terms of flavour contributions, and it's just going to, again, make it a fairly nice, clean, drinkable beer. Things like SO4 will work great though for this. You can obviously use some of the other English ale yeast as well. For me personally, I'd probably try and steer clear of anything that's too estery in terms of English ale yeast. I think golden ales generally, you're looking more for a sort of cleaner profile from the yeast. But if that's the sort of thing that you want from it, then why not give it a go? There's loads of different English ale yeast that you can experiment. So again, that's another area of your recipe construction that you can kind of experiment with a little bit and see what works for you. So yeah, that's pretty much it, I think. Only other thing I haven't mentioned is the water profile. I've just gone with my sort of fairly standard pale ale kind of water profile here. So balanced towards the sulfate, starting off with 100% RO water. The additions for that will be in the Brewfather recipe that's linked below, but the overall water profile that I'm looking for is going to be between sort of 2 or 3 to 1 sulfate to chloride, and somewhere between sort of 75 and 100 ppm on the calcium. I think in this particular recipe, it came out about 80 on the calcium, about 130, 140 on the sulfate, and around about 40, 45 on the chloride. I'm normally sort of aiming for somewhere around the region of sort of 75 calcium, 150-ish for sulfate, 50-ish for chloride, but you don't need to be too exact with that. So yeah, I'll normally just adjust those salts until I'm fairly happy with where the pH is coming out, with a little bit of adjustment with acid as well. So there would still be a bit of, in my case, phosphoric acid needed to just bring the pH down to where I want it, into that sort of safe region for the pH in the mash. And that's it. So yeah, that works quite well for me, I think, with these beers. Again, helps with the dry finish, gets the beer nice and crisp, and the bitterness coming through nice and clean, and helps your hops to kind of pop a little bit as well on the flavour. So that's definitely everything. Let's get on to the brew footage. Right, there we have it. So that is the Centennial Amarillo and EKG Golden Ale. Lovely colour on it, just as you would want, golden, funnily enough, for a golden ale. So lovely clarity as well. So you can see pretty much right through that. The Bry 97 yeast is very good flocculation wise, so I think that helps a lot with the beer dropping out nice and clear fairly easily without having to do any additional fining or anything like that. And not having a dry hop in it as well. I think generally, if you're not dry hopping, the beers tend to drop a little bit clearer, even in my experience. Well, quicker anyway, not necessarily clearer at the end of it, but it depends how much of a dry hop you're putting in and so on. So yeah, really happy with the appearance. Nice kind of fluffy white head on the top, which seems to be sticking around okay. Even leaving a little bit of lacing on the glass as well already. Aroma wise, there's not a massive amount coming off the hops, but there is a little bit of that kind of fresh kind of grapefruit, orange peel, very much that kind of citrus kind of rind aroma that you get from the Centennial and the Amarillo. Not really getting any kind of English hop notes there, and then there's some sweet kind of malt aroma in the background as well. Yeah, smells pretty appealing, so let's give it a taste test. Yeah, so as I was saying earlier, golden ale for me is all about drinkability, and that's very drinkable, so it kind of ticks the boxes for me straight away. There's a nice kind of Dry finish to it. The malt character there is fairly subdued, so it's a little bit of a bready kind of, maybe a little bit of a crackery note as well. It does taste a little bit lager-like, the kind of malt profile on there. I think that's something that you kind of get with a lot of golden ales, and that's, you know, again, helps with that kind of drinkability and refreshment. And then in terms of the hops, I do get more of the flavour from the Amarillo and the Centennial. Is there any English hop flavour there from the EKG? There's a little bit of a kind of slightly grassy, maybe hedgerow note in the background, but it's pretty subtle if it is there at all. I might just be imagining that because I know that it's in the beer. But I wouldn't say, yeah, I don't think it's entirely without any kind of English hop character. I think there is something there in the background, but you're certainly getting more of the Centennial and the Amarillo on this, to be honest. And again, with those, it's not really like an overwhelming hoppy flavour like you might get with a well-hopped APA or an American IPA or something like that. You get those sort of slightly citrusy notes from it. Definitely a bit of that kind of pithy bitterness that you maybe get with the Centennial and the Amarillo. There's a little bit of piney, kind of resiny note there, maybe from the Centennial. And I think maybe a little bit of an orangey note there from the Amarillo. But yeah, it's not overwhelming. There's still a nice balance to it between the malt and the hops there. It's just really nice, and you can see by how quickly it's disappearing out the glass that, yeah, certainly refreshment and drinkability is doing pretty well on that front. So yeah, as I said, the thing I like about this sort of beer style is it's just a drinking beer, really, for when you want to get, you know, a nice refreshing pint down you and maybe have a couple more as well afterwards, without feeling too drunk or too overwhelmed by the flavours in the beer. So it's a nice balance there, nothing too in your face, and nice and refreshing. So yeah, I'm calling that a success. I think if I was going to change anything with this, I might maybe go for a slightly more fruity hop in the combination. So I'd maybe try out Citra and Amarillo, or Citra and Centennial, or something like that, or even put a little bit of Mosaic in it, maybe. Maybe not want to go for anything too potent in there, or not, you know, maybe reduce the quantities if I did go for something like Mosaic, again, to try and keep it more of a golden ale rather than a APA. But yeah, maybe something just with a slightly brighter fruity flavour in there. But I think, again, Centennial and Amarillo is kind of a classic combination with the American hops. Amarillo, well, both of them actually, I think, pair up really well with other hops. So yeah, I think you can kind of blend either of these hops with other things like Citra or Mosaic or Simcoe or whatever, and get a really good result. Yeah, Simcoe and Amarillo is another one that I would probably like to try in this as well. So yeah, I think I'm very happy with the sort of malt bill and stuff on this recipe. I think I would recommend that as a good starting point for a golden ale. And this level of hopping seems to work quite well too. As I said, obviously you can tweak the hopping wherever you want. You might want to make it more traditional with the UK hops, maybe pull the level of hopping back a bit if you're going to do that, or try out different hop combinations for American hops in it, or a blend of the American or UK hops or other stuff as well. Some of the New Zealand hops would work really well in this sort of beer. I'm just waffling now, and I want to drink the rest of this pint, so let's wrap it up. Yeah, recipes in the description if you want to have a look at that. It's a very nice drinkable summer beer. So cheers, everyone.
I'm the dude, so that's what you call me, you know? That or his dudeness, or duder, or, you know, El Duderino if you're not into the whole brevity thing.